Hello everybody. Now I'm going to talk about ISO, aperture and shutter speed. The three things that we should have knowledge to put your camera in manual mode and do what you want to do. Sometimes I see people that are photographing in automatic mode and the camera doesn't recognize what you want, doesn't know what you want. So if you have a family portrait, for instance, and it's in a dark place, but there are children that are always moving and they are not quiet, and the light in the room is not very good. So how can we mix these three things? So these three things do the same thing. Okay, if you have an aperture, a small aperture, which means an f with a big number like f16, you have a darker image. If you have um, less light and you put your ISO in 100, you will have more light, you will have less light, so you can't take the picture. So you must raise the ISO to 1600, for instance, to get lighter. And the shutter speed too. If you have a small shutter speed, you have a lighter image. If you have a shutter speed very high, like 1000 of a second or 2000, the image gets darker. So we have three things that put images darker. The three things put the image darker, and the three things put the image lighter. So how can we play with these differences? So if you have someone, imagine you are in a place very dark, so you must raise your ISO to, for instance, 1600, and you will have the image lighter, so it will be okay. But your shutter speed, but your aperture, you have a family portrait, so if you put an aperture very big of 1.2 or 1.8, you maybe not focus everybody. So to focus everybody, you will have to have an f with a big number, which means a smaller aperture, to get everybody in the picture. Okay, so you have high ISO and a medium or a small aperture. Okay, to have more light, and have everybody in focus. If you have people moving like children or dogs or cats or whatever, you will have to raise the shutter speed, because if you don't raise it, they don't get focused. So you raise the shutter speed and you will have a darker image. So you have to play with these three things. If it's dark, the image, and now the cameras let us see how is the image. So with almost one hand you can you can move your aperture, your shutter speed, and your ISO, and to get the ideal image. Okay, so three things that do the same thing, but in different ways and to different purposes. So remember, high shutter speeds are going to give a darker image. An aperture, a small aperture, but with an f, which means the f is high, it's an f16 or more, it will give a darker image too. Okay, and if you are in a dark place, if you have an ISO of 100, the image is darker too. So if you want to get the image lighter, you must decrease the shutter speed. You must raise the aperture to 2 f2 or f4 or f1.5 or 1.8, and you must raise the ISO to 1600, for instance. So sometimes we must play with all these things, because you want, like this example I gave you, you want a big picture with a family portrait in a dark place, with people moving, with people that are not quite, that they are not still. So you will have to raise the ISO, raise the shutter speed, okay? But then the aperture must be a medium aperture to get everybody there. Because if you raise the shutter speed, you will have the moving people or the moving cats or the moving dogs, they will be in focus. But if you, because the ambient or the room is very dark, if you raise the ISO, well, you will see. Some cameras can go to ISOs very high, so sometimes you don't need to get more. You can get good images without grain, with ISOs very high. So the image, but you are seeing that, and you can control that. You see, in the lens, my cameras are. That's why I like the mechanical thing in the cameras. Don't go to menus to the menus, because if I have to go to the menus to change the ISO, to change the aperture, or to change the shutter speed, well, I will never get the image as I want. So a camera with with the mechanical things on the top of the camera, on the objective, in the objective. Normally I have objectives that I can put the f where I want. If I want f8, f9, f11, or f1.2 or f1.5, whatever. So if I want more light, I will have to have an f with a small number. With a small number, it's more light. Okay? If you have an ISO with a big number, you have more light. If you have a small shutter speed, you will have more light. Like you are seeing, the three things do the same. If you raise the aperture, or get down, if you stop down the aperture to f16, if you put the ISO in 100 at night, if you put the shutter speed in 1000, you will have a darker image. Okay? So you have to play with these three things to get the right exposition, to have the right image. I think it's a question of training this. You try with apertures with apertures, big apertures. Then you try to with big ISOs. Then you try with small shutter speeds. And you will see that the image will get more light, more lighter. If you try to slow down to raise the shutter speed to 1000 or 2000, if you want, and if you have it's dark, you will have a darker image, and you have a ISO of 100, but there is no sun, there is no light there, you will have a darker image. But it's more, of course, we always try to have an ISO the smallest possible, okay, because the grain don't appear. So you will have to play with the others, or the shutter speed and the aperture. This is because the aperture f16 ISO of 100 and the shutter speed of the aperture of 16 and the shutter speed of 2000, you will have a darker image. No, there is no chance. So you will have to raise your ISO to have a lighter image. So you can play with that. You can play with the f16 is very dark. So if it is very dark, you try f8, you try f4, you try. So then it's a question of experience and a question of trying. So when you are doing that, when I'm doing that, I have my cameras, I have all of them programmed, and to have these three controls in my thumb, in my fingers. I don't go to the menus. I put in manual, and then I raise the shutter speed, raise the ISO, or slow down with the aperture. So with all that, I can have the image, and I'm seeing what is going to happen. So I don't think it's too difficult. It's only these three things, the main things, to have a good picture, a good photo. So that's what I have to say today. It's that we have three things that do the same thing: darker images and lighter images. So the three things do the same. But why there is three things? Because of this. Because if you want a high shutter speed, you must compensate with the ISO or with the aperture, or both, You do not have a very big ISO. You maybe you will go to an aperture, to a big aperture of 2.8. Well, it depends on the place you are, of the place where you are, the light you have, and it depends on all of that. And because you move that on your fingers, and when you are looking at your camera and you are looking what you are focusing, you will see that the image will go to where you want. I want a darker image. I put the ISO more low. I put the aperture more a small aperture, more small aperture, and a bigger shutter speed. It depends on what I want to photograph. If I want to photograph something that is moving fast, of course I want a big shutter speed. But then if I have not enough light, I will have to raise something the ISO, but to get not too many grain, and to not have much grain, I will have to move the aperture to a big aperture, because more light, if the aperture is bigger, the more light comes in the camera. So with all these things, these three things, you do photograph. That's how I photograph. Always like this, and I don't want another way, because like this I can control. Because if I want something that has no light, I want it dark, I will move some of these things. If I want to focus something that is moving more fast, I will raise the shutter speed. But if I have good light, well, I don't have to move the ISO, and I can have an aperture of f8 or f4 with no problem. But if I have no light, if it's getting dark, it's late in the afternoon, but I want to catch something that is moving fast, I will have to raise the ISO, okay? But to a level that the grain doesn't appear. There's tests to do that. We don't move the aperture or the shutter speed, and you put your ISO from 100 to 300, 400, 12, 10,000, 12,000, and you will see the image. If the image is good, what's the reach of your camera, okay, in terms of ISO? All of these can be tested, okay? But if you have a big aperture, the big aperture of 1.2, you will not have everything in focus. It's very difficult, because it's very it gives a very nice bouquet. The background will be not in focus, but maybe you want the background in focus, because it's a big family, you have lots of people there, I want to catch everybody, so I will go to f4 or f8 depending on the light I have. Okay, so remember, aperture, ISO, and shutter speed always darken or light or get your images more lighter. They do the same thing, but in different ways, with different purposes, with the different objectives. Because if you have an objective of getting a good picture, you will have to play with this, and training and experiencing this will give you a good image. That's all. Thank you for listening to me, and if you have any questions or comments, or if you don't agree with anything, you don't forget to like, to subscribe, and to put the bell, to check the bell, and to comment if you want. You are welcome if you comment, of course, in a good way, because we always learn with everyone. So if you have a much better way to explain this, of course I'm here to accept that, and if it's really better, I will repeat this video with more specifically, to try to you to understand, of course. Okay, so remember these three things: only dark, only get the images more dark or more light. They do the same thing, but in different ways. So you must play with that. And the modern cameras let us see what's happening when I move the ISO, when I move the shutter speed, and when I move the aperture. And I see if I can focus with the ideal. To me now is automatic. I don't think too much. There's one of my cameras, I do it with one hand only. I will say later what camera I do that with one hand. But I don't move in the menus. Some other cameras, I program the cameras to put it only already with things that I don't have to move a lot in the shutter speed or in the ISO or in the aperture, or I can put priority in the aperture. If you do aperture priority, you can then put your shutter speed wherever you want, because the aperture will be okay with light, with the right light for that speed. Of course, the ISO, it's the minimum for certain shutter speed. Some cameras do this. Another of my cameras do this. So remember that there are cameras that do a lot of things that you can program with a lot of with variations of these three things. With these three things, you do photography, and very well. So we don't need more than this to start our manual photographing in manual with these three variables that do the same thing but in different ways, and that can give us the best of the best shots that we can make. Okay. The automatic, not always. Sometimes the automatic is good. Sometimes it's good because I'm there. I'm struggling with the ISO, the shutter speed, and the aperture, and I don't, and the things go wrong. So sometimes, but it's better to move this if I want to be quick, because if in the automatic I will now not have a good shot. Okay. And if you want to do more photographs, more different photographs with dark spaces, with well, more kind of fine art photography. You will have to move to know how to move very well this. Okay. Like the long expositions, etc. I will talk later about that. But for now, it's this three things for the same purpose, the same objective: darken the image or lighting the image. They do all the same, but in a different way, and you can play with that. Because if you need a big shutter speed because something is moving, then you must move move in the ISO or in the aperture. Okay, that's all. Now, thank you.